from my PhD times, I just got exposed to these technologies, and I just saw the potential of being able to unlock so much information from a sample and then give that in an understandable way to people. Now, it's this whole journey and this whole pathway that is Maven Health, because that is absolutely not easy. It takes a lot of R&D, a lot of knowledge and expertise to get such a very high and sensitive instrument into a product. It's into something that can benefit people's lifestyle.
Welcome to the Healthspan Lab. I'm your host, Pietro Dansini. In a world with increasing life expectancy, this podcast shares everyday tools and protocols to remain healthy and maintain a high quality of life. Because it's not about how long, but how well we live. Season 2 features entrepreneurs of health tech companies developing new solutions to improve people's health. The first episode is with Christopher Wall, pharmacist, PhD researcher in metabolic pathways at EPFL, and founder of Maven Health. Maven Health is a Swiss startup based in Zurich that developed saliva-based metabolic tests. Maven Health test analyzes 47 metabolites to take a snapshot of a patient's metabolic well-being and personalize their healthcare. You can think of Maven Health as a way for Chris and his co-founder Kevin to democratize access to more than 11 years of research that they conducted in how metabolism works and can be improved. You'll hear about preventative medicine, the importance of metabolic screenings, why saliva is the future of health tests, and above all, are you sure you're healthy? Before we start, I'd like to emphasize that the content of this podcast is separate from my work at Rivia, but it's part of my desire and wishes to share everyday tools that improves people's well-being and the health span. Get ready to learn and be inspired. Hey Chris, great to have you.
Thank you, Pietro. Great to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to delve into the preventative medicine that Maven Health is building and the value of metabolic screening, why we're going to see many more saliva tests soon on the market, and in general, how these will improve health span. First off, I want to start with a small anecdote just happened this week. A good friend just came up to me and said that from just a spontaneous health test, learned that he had a high cholesterol level. So I was just wondering how frequent are these undetected conditions and why it's important to prevent?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting case actually, and it's a sign of how important it is to do preventive screenings, and that's exactly the space that we're in, and we're going to dive into that later, of course. Maybe a story from our side, from Maven Health. We've done many research studies, and one of our early studies that we did is when we studied a healthy population and we looked at their metabolic markers, and at the same time we also measured their traditional blood markers. So indeed, cholesterol was one of them. And we found that almost 10% of the people had some form of their metabolism that was not functioning properly. So either triglycerides or cholesterol, and their traditional markers, these. So actually almost 10% were, already on the track to metabolic unhealthy. So, it just shows all around us. It's very important to catch these things early and to screen even before we get sick.
Yeah, preventative medicine is going to be very important. What I understand is that Maven Health is in particular tracking the metabolic health. And so why don't you give me like an idea of why is that?
Yeah, so, we're in the field of metabolic health and metabolism, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners here already have an idea of what metabolic health is and what metabolism is. But, in a nutshell, metabolism is, of course, the obvious part of digesting food into energy, and this is a process we all understand well. But besides that, our metabolism actually influences many, many different processes in our body. It helps with building muscle, it helps with removing waste products from our metabolism, for example, protein waste, and all of these complex processes at the same time. And having a good metabolic health essentially means that, all of these parts of our body are functioning in a good and efficient way. You can almost compare it to like a car. If a car has some parts that are broken, eventually the part of the car is going to break, and it's going to also damage other parts of the car, right? So our metabolism also works like this. It's like an orchestra of all these different processes that are working together. And it's very important to have all of the parts in balance so that we have the healthiest and the most efficient metabolism. And in the end, this will also prevent or actually lower the risk for metabolic diseases further down the way. And we can go very deep into that, but an interesting thing to realize is that our metabolism is influenced by also many factors. And one part is genetic. So people know a little bit more about DNA nowadays. There's these DNA tests available. So one part is definitely our genetics. They can give us, more or less efficient pathways in a certain sense. But the most and biggest impact on our metabolic health is definitely our lifestyle. And when I say lifestyle, I mean all kinds of aspects. I'm really talking about our activity levels, our exposure to toxins, and I'm here talking about smoking and alcohol, or also, pollution. All these things influence our metabolism, but especially also the food that we eat. And this is something, that we're also very much creating awareness for, that our lifestyle has such a large impact on our metabolic health that, people should at an early stage already be aware of what they eat, how they eat. And that's kind of also what Maven Health is really fighting for, is to create not only this awareness, but also the tools to be able to do that. So it's a very complex situation.
Talking of awareness, many might experience something that might already signal that they have something not in order, let's say. What's usually things that people might look for to detect or have a sense of that they might need to check their metabolic health?
So that's a very good point. And, and I'm a little bit biased because I'm so in the field. I would say everyone needs to check their metabolic health, even from a very young age, because we don't really know. And that's kind of the interesting thing about metabolic diseases, really, and metabolic state, is that it's very silent. Our bodies are very resilient and very good at adapting to different situations. So if a part of your body or a part of your metabolism is not functioning properly, it's very internal and it's very unnoticed, and the interesting thing about metabolic diseases specifically is that the moment you start to get symptoms or you notice symptoms of a metabolic disease, you are already very far on the path towards getting a disease. If you talk about diabetes, for example, diabetes type 2, if you start to get symptoms, which could be thirst or excess urination, these typical diabetes symptoms, you already have a very damaged insulin sensitivity, or, your insulin receptors really don't respond to your insulin anymore. And this is already very far down the path to disease. You have to start with medication at that point, right? So that's the interesting thing, that, symptoms come very late in these disease processes. And that's why it's actually interesting and important for people to start to screen at an early point. That's what we're also building at Maven Health, is to actually provide this this tool that people can already start to look at their health instead of their diseases, and look at, hey, where am I on the route to these metabolic conditions, and what's the current state of my body? How is everything functioning? And before I get the symptoms, because actually when you get the symptoms, you're very, very late.
Well, of course, I'd love also to understand way ahead of a disease. To understand, just to be very frank, I never came to mind to do a test. So in general, you mentioned as early as possible, but maybe how frequent, once you start doing it, so what would be recommended?
Yeah, I really like that question, because it's also a whole mindset shift in the current system, because medicine really was built on symptoms and finding a disease and eradicating it. And my favorite example is actually antibiotics. When you have an infection, you have a lot of symptoms, you give a medicine and the disease is over, right? So for metabolic disease, this is not the case. When you have symptoms, you're too late already. And I think everyone should screen from as early as possible. I would say between 20 and 30 years old, you should do a first test to see, is my baseline metabolism, is that okay? Maybe one test to see if everything is okay. When we're between our 20s and our 30s, we're still very young and very, very active. And in general, metabolic health is quite good. And our bodies are also still very capable of adapting. But after 30 and onwards, we really suggest to start testing annually to see, okay, how is my lifestyle now adapting to my metabolic health? And at that point, a yearly test is definitely recommended. And as we continue through life, I think it's definitely recommended to screen every 6 months, because our metabolism, it's also a very dynamic biological phenomenon. So if you, for example, start, extreme sports and you start eating a lot, your metabolism is going to adapt to this because it's starting to build muscle. It's going to change which pathways are most active compared to someone, for example, who is fasting. Someone that has a sedentary lifestyle but doesn't eat very much. There's different metabolic processes that are activated in these different situations. So, coming back to your question of how often people should screen, I think people should screen from as early as possible. I really think between 20 and 30s, do a first screen, and from your 30s onwards, people should definitely have an annual screen just to see, hey, where am I in my metabolic health?
That's already interesting that you mentioned diet. I know I want to ask you a couple of questions on that since we had a little story about it together. But first, you mentioned the evolution of metabolism that changed. I was just reading today about neuroplasticity that actually evolves a bit like as a step function. It's not a continuous degradation of neuroplasticity. It's like just change, like you have these like steps of change. Is that the same for metabolism? Just does they degrade over time in a continuous way, or has break steps?
Yeah, that's it's actually with the neuroplasticity thing, it's a broader biological, let's say general phenomena that we see in biology, where there is a certain resistance and adaptation to a process, but there is a breaking point in many processes in biology. So, our body has compensatory mechanisms to kind of adjust for slight fluctuations in either activity or biological, let's say nutrient availability in our case. But if you stress the system too hard and too long, there's definitely a breaking point that you will see. And then there would be a very, very steep decline of the individual's physical state. And I think, we mentioned earlier the diabetes example of diabetes symptoms. When you get symptoms, that's the breaking point. That's the point when your body cannot handle the glucose anymore because the insulin, the insulin production is at the max, and the sensitivity of, the cells to measure, to fuel the insulin isn't sufficient anymore. And that's the breaking point. Also in metabolic diseases and metabolic health is definitely present. Yeah. And sadly, the breaking point in metabolic diseases is often, diabetes or heart attacks or strokes. It's quite severe phenomenon. So we try to avoid that and prevent these before they happen.
I kind of already partially know the answer to the next question, but I want to ask you anyway because it would be super interesting for the audience. I know because you told me about it, you explained it in Croatia, but about this pathway, do I say it correctly when I say like glucose pathway with the insulin receptor? Like what's the right term?
Yeah, we call it glucose management in some words, or glucose homeostasis. There's a lot of different words of having it. Yeah.
Talking of glucose homeostasis, like, can we recover from the breaking point, or is it like a no return situation?
That's actually a bit controversial, and there's conflicting evidence in the literature on that. So we know early stage, let's say pre-diabetes, or even before that, let's say early stage insulin desensitization can definitely be reversed very efficiently with lifestyle. And you can imagine it as a curve. The later you are in this process, the less efficient lifestyle factors are, right? Lifestyle changes. After the breaking point, as you mentioned, there are some cases of it being reversed, which is quite exceptional. The normal way people go through the healthcare system nowadays is they start with metformin and then they later go to insulin injections in the different forms. So if we say, okay, in general, when people reach that breaking point, they don't really recover unless they're kind of an exceptional case. But on the other hand, we know that preventive measures are extremely efficient. So if you measure this early stage insulin desensitization, you definitely can reverse this very efficiently with your diet and your lifestyle. And we're not even talking extreme things here. We're probably talking like walking every day, maybe 10 minutes, and just cutting out people that eat more than 100 grams of sugar a day. We're really talking about people that have a very unhealthy diet. And by removing these factors, you actually see a very, very efficient reversal of this metabolic decline, as we call it.
I like that you tied it back to the lifestyle or quality of life. That's how I like to see these things, that in the end, they impact the the quality of life that you can carry on. Now, I understand that all these is like very important to track. And we mentioned like the frequency of tests. One thing that comes into in place is the easiness of doing these tests. And that's why I loved that when we were just in Greenville start of this year, you just mentioned how the test via saliva are so much more handy, let's say, that are going to be ubiquitous. Why testing metabolism with saliva, and why did you choose this method?
Yeah. Why we chose saliva is kind of more from how we kind of run things at Maven Health. We look at every situation with a clean slate, and we just choose whatever is best. So, some anecdotal stories is that we definitely looked at blood as well. Blood is a great matrix and traditionally very much used. But in the end, we chose for saliva because saliva has so much information in it that we were like, okay, if we don't have to use needles, why would we use needles, And maybe, it's now a good time to kind of talk a bit about what is saliva, because when you hear about saliva, it's something that people, either spit on the ground or they just swallow. It's nothing too interesting, but saliva is actually very, very interesting matrix. It's fascinating that, it has well-known functions such as it lubricates our food and it starts the digestion. There's some enzymes in the food, amylases they're called. They break down carbohydrates so they're easier to digest. So already very long we've known that saliva has a functional and metabolic role. You can even test this yourself. If you chew on bread very long, it becomes sweet, and this is actually because of the enzymes in your saliva that digest it, and then it becomes sweet. It's
wow,
a little experiment.
Know.
Yeah, especially white bread.
Try.
Especially white bread. It's something fun to do, but we already know that saliva has its metabolic role, and also it's very important for oral health. It protects our mouth cavity from pathogens and keeps the homeostasis. Now, it was in 2015 that a paper came out by David Wishart, who is a very leading role in the field of metabolic testing and metabolic measurements. And he measured everything in saliva that can be measured. So he used all the state-of-the-art instruments and all the high-tech measurement technologies. And he found that there's 853 different components in saliva. And we're only talking here about small molecules. So you're talking about ions and fatty acids and amino acids and all kinds of small chemical compounds. And, that kind of highlights that there's so much information in saliva that we can use, but it's just not yet publicly known. So we're really tapping into this wealth of information that is in saliva to kind of build a picture of an individual's metabolic state and use this to track their metabolic health. The reason why, because people were like, but blood, it makes sense because it transports all your molecules around your body. And then people ask, why does saliva have all this metabolic information in it? And it's basically because saliva acts as a mirror of the blood. So it has the same molecules as the blood. It has a lower concentration than the ones in blood because the way the saliva is generated, it's in small sacs or glands. We call them saliva glands. And around these saliva glands are very, very tiny blood vessels, and they're wrapped around it very tightly. This, of course, helps the saliva glands to function properly. But what happens then is because these blood vessels are so thin and the saliva gland wall is also so thin, there's a lot of exchange or movement of molecules from these small blood vessels into the saliva itself. So this is why, saliva really functions as a mirror of what's in the blood. And it's basically because the advancements in technology and things that we can measure these lower concentrations now in an accurate way. So, saliva, I think is going to be really important in the future because of the way that we now are able to handle the data and measure more information in a robust way, that we can step away from these uncomfortable needles that we now have to use for these blood pricks.
Yeah, because I guess also many people, are typically afraid of needles. So they would resist from taking a test. I didn't know that there was so much information in saliva.
And DNA, it contains your DNA as well, don't forget.
Yeah, exactly, because you mentioned this relationship with the blood cells and DNA. Is it sort of like the fingerprint? Like, is it something that unique of us? Like, can you recognize a person from saliva?
If you measure their DNA, you could. If you only measure their metabolites, it would be very difficult. You would need a lot of prior knowledge about this person's metabolism to match it. And DNA is really like our personal code, right? It's like our fingerprint and very specific to an individual. Our metabolism is too dynamic for that. If you completely change your diet and your lifestyle today, I guarantee you within months, you're going to have a completely different metabolism. It's really dependent on our lifestyle and our food. And that's kind of also the magic, that it's so adaptable and um, I wouldn't say easy to improve, but there's a large potential for us to improve our metabolic health and our metabolism because it's so dynamic just by eating better and having better lifestyles.
Okay, so it just takes in the month span, like this is a matter of months, or I guess depends on also how much intense is the change.
Yeah, that's a big rabbit hole that we can go into, but I can tell you if you do a fast, it's 2 days. In 2 days, some people might be familiar with a ketogenic diet or a fasting diet and the process of ketosis. But for the people not familiar with this, it's when you deprive your body of carbohydrates like sugar and starch and all kinds of, basically bread and potatoes and rice. Then your body switches to fat. And this switch we can measure very, very accurately. So this switch is, artificial because we can, if you very extremely cut out all carbohydrates, this shift is very sudden and your body does react. And this takes place over 2-3 days, and we can measure that. So you're absolutely right in saying it's the severity of change that basically dictates how fast your metabolism will adapt. But in general, if you make minor changes, let's say you do, you start to take up a sport, before you didn't do sports and now you take up running, you go running once a week, twice a week, maybe even 3 times a week in the weekend if it's sunny outside, then, within 3 months, you're also already going to, be able to measure very, very marked improvements in your metabolic state and metabolic health.
Yeah, on keto, like a fun fact that I learned recently, I haven't tried myself, but you can notice also from the breath, if I'm not mistaken, you can really see, feel that you're changing the diet, and yes, as a result of also the metabolic activity. You mentioned,
it's interesting. Let me look into that there. It's a molecule called acetone, and I think it's also a nail polish remover, the old-fashioned nail polish remover. So that's a gas that comes into your saliva and then also into your breath, because that's basically when you start to burn the fats that's produced from that process, and that's why indeed when you're in this ketosis, your breath does smell like acetone, very much so. Yeah,
worth considering before transition to keto diet. On the test, you mentioned these not mistaken 853 metabolites that you can test. What Maven Health decided to test, and what does this test can measure?
So the 853, as I mentioned, this was really a research project, a very large research consortium that involved many different instruments, different technologies. That's definitely out of scope of what we do. We measure a subset of these 853 metabolites. We measure 47. So 47 metabolites are in our test. And we focus mainly on small molecules that are very relevant for our metabolic processes. So, for example, amino acids, these are, you can see them as the building blocks of protein. So all of our protein is built out of small Lego blocks, let's say, to a bigger Lego block. They're called amino acids. And even they, besides just being the constituents of proteins, each has its individual role in signaling. So by measuring a large, wide array of amino acids, we can already say a lot of different things about your metabolism. We don't just measure amino acids. We also have, for example, our gut bacteria metabolites. We have some alcohols in it. We have amines in it. So within these 47, we already start to touch on very, very broad range of different metabolic processes. And that's kind of the magic of our test, where it's not just what you measure, but it's actually how you interpret it, right? So, Maven Health is very focused on technology, which is not just the analysis, but also very much the software and the data and the algorithms that we use to predict your metabolic state. And that the combination of those factors actually is what allows us to really assess if an individual's metabolic state is well or not, and specifically which subparts of the metabolic processes are functioning well or less well. So what you get basically from our test, and that's really what the most I think one of the most important things is what can we do with the results? It's fine to measure these metabolites, but what can you do with it? And we can tell an individual very specifically, hey, it's your protein metabolism that is not working well, or it's the waste management that's not working well, or your gut microbiome, they're not producing enough metabolites, So instead of this general advice, which is a good start, by the way, and don't get me wrong, of just moving better and eating better, we want to reach a state or a world where we can say move better in this way or eat better in this way, because this is exactly what you need. Your body is lacking this, or it's not reacting well to this and that from our diet or lifestyle. So it's also, very much into the direction of personalized care, personalized nutrition. That's what we want to achieve, that we, with minimal effort, achieve maximal results on our metabolic health.
Gotcha. And so the idea is that like the test spits out a result that not only tells you the baseline and the status, but then gets what is off within the different parts. And then how does this test look? How can you see it? Because often you don't get to see the results of a test that you get from a doctor or from a clinic. How does Maven Health manage that?
Yeah. So, we're definitely not a traditional test, and we kind of touched on that at the beginning of the podcast, that we're very much in favor of a new way of looking at metabolic health and diseases. We're really in favor of prevention. And what you get from the test is also kind of following that. We don't just print out the traditional way of a list of metabolites and values. We really break it down into understandable chunks. So the main thing that we do is we give a person a score. Where are you in a score for your metabolic state on a score from 0 to 100? So where are you right now? And that we break down into different categories. So we look at how is your energetic metabolism? How is your cognitive performance? Because also metabolism is strongly linked to our thinking and our memory. Then finally, also emotional well-being. Our emotions are also very much influenced by our metabolic state. So we break it down into those factors, and then we say, okay, for each of these three categories, which metabolites are playing a role? Which metabolites are higher or lower? What do they do? And then even all the way at the end, we also advise on the patterns. So, we see this group of metabolites, they're all not functioning well, then that can influence, let's say, your energetic balance. They're not functioning well. And because we see this pattern, we advise, this type of lifestyle modification, this type of dietary modification, add these foods, remove these foods. That's kind of the advice that we can give in an actionable way. So, in your this amount of time, change your lifestyle in this way, and this will help you be healthier and also feel better.
Yeah, just I was wondering why you were speaking like that. Yeah, this gives so much visibility on your metabolic health and status. I was just doing a comparison with some tracker light. Now, many people wear wearables like watch, and for example, I got it as well initially for mostly sleep, but then also sport activity like the heart BPM. But then I noticed that sometimes I get too much into that tracking and being extremely aware of what's going on, my sleep breakdown, and then you just need to okay, just sleep as it comes, and relax. How do you see that? Also, I don't know, personally, do you track it? What's your approach to that? And with Maven Health, what's the general philosophy to tracking?
So I definitely, on a personal note, I definitely track as much as I can. I like to run on heart rate for one, for example. Some people run on time or on distance. I like to run on heart rate because that achieves the metabolic effects I want. I don't run for fun. I run for metabolism. It's not true. I do enjoy running. It's also just in mind that I do want to kind of, I do it for cardio training, right? So I like to get my heart rate high, and then I run on based on that, because also going too high is unhealthy. So I do track, and I like tracking. Tracking is important, of course, but we shouldn't also go too far. We shouldn't limit our lives based on what our trackers say. For one, being happy is one of the most important things in our lives, right? So if you have a great metabolic health, but you're a bit less happy because of it, that's also something that's conflicting. We should think about that and ask ourselves really what we want. Now, that's also kind of how we see our test, and the philosophy of Maven Health is that it's not about cutting out everything and getting the best metabolic health or any severe kind of changes. It's really about finding things that are really not working well at the moment and just putting your attention to it. Just say, hey, this part of your body has trouble with your lifestyle and your diet. It's not in balance. That's basically the key word. You should focus on that a little bit, because a little change can already go a long way into restoring homeostasis and metabolic balance in your body. So it's not about any kind of weird and extreme changes. It's really about the general direction of like, are you eating enough or too much protein? How do you know that? Too much protein is also bad, and people don't really realize that. That's just a very basic question. How do you know? And that's something very basic that doesn't exist, and that's really something we've built is these simple questions. What's enough protein? How much protein should you eat? And that's something we advise on. So it's more like these general checks of like, what I do now, is that working for me on the inside because I cannot see it on the outside? That's what we provide.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I, for example, also saying today I was learning about the inflammation that similar to what you just said. We just often have a certain idea of, I don't know, protein. We're like very concerned about getting enough protein, but then, as you say, there is even too much. Same, I was learning about inflammation, that we are all concerned to not get inflamed, and but the problem is when it's chronic inflammation. Like the general inflammation is actually very good. That just brings attention to the cells that need to get rid of waste. And so it's interesting to sometimes like counter intuitively pose the right question.
Yeah, definitely. And we can shed some more light on this topic, is that it's all about, it's really interesting you say that inflammation is good, and people should realize that too much inflammation is bad. A little bit of inflammation is very useful. We need it exactly to recruit cells and inflammatory markers and cytokines to the places where it's needed. And that's the same for protein, and there's been a lot of attention in the media of like, protein is good, we're all eating too less protein, this and that. And I think we've now reached a phase where people are over consuming protein. Just sitting on your behind and eating a lot of protein doesn't make you stronger. It's really about building. If you want to build muscle, you need to eat a lot of protein and a specific type of amino acid, and then you will build muscle faster. Now, if you stop that muscle building, you should also stop the supplementation. Because in a way, also metabolic excess, and that's kind of comparable to your inflammation comparison, too much of nutrients is also bad. I mean, this is called a metabolic excess, where your cells don't really have to work for nutrients anymore. So the cells, they choose an easy way of making energy. But this easy way of making energy, if that's used too much, that actually causes, that can cause cellular inflammation. So it causes inflammation inside the cells. And this is not a good kind of inflammation. If you constantly eat too much nutrients and too much food in excess, you get this type of metabolic inflammation. So that's also very comparable, this inflammation anecdote, to our metabolism, that we too much is also too bad. And personally, I think now we should focus more, again, a little bit more on micronutrients, because I'm not going to go, maybe not in this podcast, maybe the next one, like the nutritional value of the food products we eat, the actual nutrients in the food we eat compared to back in the days. That's also something we have to shed light on. But yeah, too much of anything is not good, right?
I love that you also mentioned like the perception that you might be like a bit better on metabolic health, but then a bit sadder, like a bit more sad because of the perception of it. And while doing research, I listened to another interview another podcast you went on. Kevin was on it, your founder, and he mentioned like a super interesting thing about the visualization. Mentioned something that you also looked into the way to report on these results. And for example, that the grades from 0 to 100 that you mentioned before could be perceived very badly if it's below 50, just for the general perception of reports and grades that we are exposed to since when we're young. So that you're looking into ways to optimize it. That
as I said, sometimes people forget that communication is such an important and difficult thing. We spent a lot of time listening to our customers, our nutritionists and dietitians, something maybe we can dive into a little bit later. But we understand how difficult it is to convince people of a healthy lifestyle and how to communicate results. And, we spent a lot of time thinking about making impact, because ultimately that's what we want. We want to make an impact in people's lives, a positive impact on individuals and society, that we say, hey, live healthier, you will feel better. We are now making these tools available to be able to do that. And technology is a very important part, and we have a lot of it. We have a patented technology, and we're very, very advanced in that. But we also focused a lot on the communication and the presentation, definitely. And we keep on, interviewing the professionals, let's say lifestyle professionals, and asking them, how do you make an impact in someone's life? How do you communicate this effectively? And this is all built into the Maven Health report. How do we communicate a very complex issue in a very simple way without losing too much information that it becomes something else, a different message, right? And that's kind of the balance that we really try to find, is to keep it technical but understandable and very true to the metabolic situation that there is. And if people are interested, of course, please visit our website, because our reports are on there, and mavenhealth.ch. There you can see what I'm talking about. If we talk about visualization and how the reports are built, now you know that we spent a lot of time thinking about how to get this complex message across in an understandable way for everyone, to kind of everything to motivate people, to try to get people to understand you can do a lot about your metabolic health, and it's possible. You're trying to motivate and try to instigate a better life.
Yeah, you also correctly already anticipated that we like the role of healthcare providers. But before moving to that, I'd love to better understand what happens after the test, what technology you use, and what's special about it.
Yeah, so funny, we started with the communication part, but first, technology is a very, very big part of our business. And there's a few parts of our technology that are very distinct. So the first is the analytical technology, and I will highlight that now a little bit. The second part is our data technology, because we're really focused on analyses and data things. And the third is this communication part that we already just talked about. What we use for measuring metabolites is a technology called nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So that's a very, very big word, but essentially this is a very big magnet that is able to measure magnetic fields. Now, every molecule has its own, let's say, magnetic properties, just to simplify it a bit. And this magnetic property of a molecule is very specific to this molecule. And you can see it as a type of fingerprint. It's very, very specific. With this nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, we're able to detect all of these fingerprints that are all in this mixture. We're able to detect them from a single sample in one measurement. And that's kind of very powerful of this technology, that we don't have to use lots of complicated buffers or lots of preparation time. We can really measure all this information. It comes from a single measurement from a single sample of saliva. And also not a very large sample of saliva, mind you. We only require 1 milliliter of saliva. Well, that's really, like a very, very tiny amount.
Less or more than a spit?
It's about 2, I think, 2 spits, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, spit is actually not useful for us, at the risk of going into a tangent here, but saliva is very specific, because we have multiple saliva glands producing different types of saliva. So we have 3 major saliva glands, and actually when you spit saliva, the discomposition of saliva might be different. So when we ask people to collect saliva is to sit quietly and take the saliva tube and just let the saliva naturally produce, because this gives us the cleanest and the most high quality saliva, but also better and reproducible results. So there's also different types of saliva, actually.
Okay.
Okay. So if you spit, it may not be the cleanest saliva, because it's such a sensitive instrument that we use. We really ask people we need very clean saliva, for example. So we need people to not eat before, and not brush teeth, not smoke. All of this gives us the cleanest and highest quality saliva. And this is what we use in these instruments, because they're so super, super sensitive, that we will detect if you have drank coffee just before, we can measure it. If you drank a glass of wine in the last 3 hours, we will measure it. We will see if you have actually followed the protocol. It's all in the saliva, the saliva doesn't lie. So we do ask people to follow the protocol carefully, because this gives us the highest quality data as possible.
Okay, so you were saying that the saliva naturally flows into the test. It's about 1 milliliter surgeon, around 2 spits, but different type, and then gets sent to lab where there is NMR. You mentioned very repeatable results. Can you expand maybe a bit on this nuclear magnetic resonance? So what's the relevance, and how come before Maven Health I had never heard of it?
Yeah. So, nuclear magnetic resonance is one of 2 major technologies that are used in the scientific field to measure many metabolites at the same time. And this science is called metabolomics. This is a science of measuring metabolites. The science is quite mature. The science has been around for quite a while, and different technologies have seen a lot of advancements in the last years. including nuclear magnetic resonance. We've seen a strong advancement in the sensitivity of these instruments, and they've become more compact and more routine. And this has really unlocked this opportunity that we see now to use these really advanced scientific tools for something that's useful for the population. So it's that, that's kind of from my PhD times. I just got exposed to these technologies, and I just saw the potential of being able to unlock so much information from a sample, and then give that in an understandable way to people. Now, it's this whole journey and this whole pathway that is Maven Health, because that is absolutely not easy. This takes a lot of R&D, a lot of knowledge and expertise to get such a very high and sensitive instrument into a product. It's into something that can benefit people's lifestyle. We're talking about diet and lifestyle, but also that other side. So that's the other pillar that I kind of want to touch on is the technology. So you have these sensitive instruments, but they were not suitable for measuring all these saliva samples, not at all. So we had to kind of adapt how the data is translated in an automated manner into these profiles that we then use for our metabolic screening. So we did a lot of studies, human trials, calibrations, algorithm development, and software development to kind of translate that scientific power into a product, into something that people understand and that they can use to improve their lives. So there's also this strong data science and algorithm and software aspect that we've all developed to kind of really bridge that gap between these advanced tools that were ready for this step, and then actually building it for people that they can actually use it. Because in a way, you can see it every time you do a Maven Health test, you're just tapping into this extremely powerful machine and getting the metabolic information out of it through the platform that we've built, and that contains a lot of work.
Yeah, so it's three components together: is the technology test, is the hardware test, and then also the communication you mentioned, like the way you then report and then make it actionable. I would love you to share a bit more about your journey. You mentioned the PhD that is most likely the origination. I'd love to first share a little anecdote. I like to share anecdotes sometimes in the podcast, especially in cases where we have stories together. And I love simply how when we're in Croatia, relaxing, just having a holiday and fun, you just spontaneously decided to give a university level seminar on how different diets influence metabolism. And I really loved how it was clear how much you cared from the details and the attempt to make everyone really get something to take away and learn, so that they could be practical tools that could have improved their well-being based on their goals, their habits. And I was very clear, very authentic, very genuine. And I know it's just part of the story, because you then can use the results from this test in many different ways. There are sometimes conditions that you really want to prevent because they are impacting much more than the simple lifestyle or diet. So yeah, segue to how you got into it, how come this passion for helping people figure out their metabolic health and then take action on it.
And I think that kind of shows what I guess my driving force is in my professional life, is really to kind of translate and pass on all the knowledge that I studied quite long, and I'll touch on the journey, but to translate that to people, to kind of help them with questions that they have, and especially in the metabolic field. And that's really my passion, let's say, to be able to help people with their metabolism from all of the things and all of the experience that I had. And that's kind of also the energy that I put into Maven Health together with Kevin Hoff, the co-founder. We both put a lot of energy and a lot of passion into this project because we really care about building, high quality products that help people in their lives to live better, to live healthier. And we think there's a lot of technology out there that just isn't in the hands of people yet. They don't have access to it yet. And that's really what we strive to unlock. I think everything started, I guess, during my degree as to train to be a pharmacist. So I was studying in Utrecht University in the Netherlands to become a pharmacist, which runs in the family. My grandmother was also a pharmacist in Ireland. So it's a family profession, I guess, by now. And I really liked the mix between biology and, let's say, pharma, because pharma is basically, or pharmacy is a type of applied biology. So already there you see the application and always the practicality of science. That's also something I always liked. And then during the elective part of my pharmacy degree, I followed a metabolism course, and they just broke down the basics of glucose metabolism, fatty acid metabolism. And then I realized, this is such a fascinating area, and it affects me right now. We studied about all kinds of cardiovascular drugs and the best treatment options if someone has a heart attack once or twice. It's a lot of protocols. I realized that's important information to have. But what I can do right now in my life is actually adapt my diet, adapt my lifestyle, learn about the foods I eat and all that sort of stuff. So that kind of, I started down this rabbit hole. And I also realized, like, listen, we need these medicines definitely if we have an illness, and they save many, many lives. But the way we eat and the way we live has a much more, well, I would say equal or larger impact on our health, because this has an impact on our health throughout our entire life. We take medicine when we're sick, but we eat all the time in our life. So I saw this strong impact, and that's kind of also why I spun into a PhD afterwards, which was a collaboration between Nestle and EPFL, where again, you see, the corporate and the scientific kind of coming together in my life. And there I learned a lot about mitochondria, energy, cellular metabolism. So I really broke down all these processes. And then I thought, damn, I've studied now for 11 years. It's time to go out there and again, translate all of this into something that's useful. And me and Kevin have been working hard on this project, ever since the beginning. And now, Maven Health test is available. People can use it. We're very proud of all the progress that we've made, and very excited for the future.
It's kind of cool to see Maven Health as 11 years from your side, and probably, I assume, 5 or more years from Kevin's side, condensed into a way to democratize these new technologies, this new knowledge that we have for everyone. So I like that. Now that probably many are probably wondering, okay, now that I know all of these, that love to get all the benefits from this preventive medicine approach, where do people can find Maven Health test?
So that's a good question. Maven Health test is available, but we I kind of touched on it earlier. Our test is available to nutritionists and dietitians, and this is a very conscious choice that we did. We didn't want to give the test directly to consumers, to people directly, because we still feel that the science is still a bit too complex. We still find that the impact that we can make on a person's life is still when the test is provided together with a professional. So our test is actually together with dietitians and nutritionists. They have already their nutritionist programs. That's nothing new. You can go to a nutritionist. But now when you go to a nutritionist, they can offer the Maven Health screening to you, which gives them an entire picture of your metabolic health. And together with the nutritionist, you can tailor your nutritional program to precisely your metabolism. So it's a conscious choice that we chose, and we think this is how we make most impact. To kind of, people need to be guided and coached still through this, because metabolism is very overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of false information out there as well. We thought, and we know, that the impact is best through nutritionists. So if people want to buy the test, you can find a nutritionist that offer our tests on the main page of our website, www.mavenhealth.ch. You just need to scroll down on the main page, and you see there an interactive map where you see all the locations in Switzerland where you can buy our test.
Yeah, that's a good point to have as a reference, mavenhealth.ch, because I assume that now are scaling up also the number of sites where your professional healthcare can test people metabolic health. And I like that you're considerate also in the way you're approaching it. Because it's good to transition from disease-based, more preventive, but there is always a proper approach, and that science is also still complex for many people, even if the idea of also this podcast is to help people to understand better the science behind. Maybe just wondering, since many listening also are interested in on the business side, we mostly talked about the science behind Maven Health. What's on your path for 25? What's the ambition of the year?
So I think our biggest ambition now is to create awareness of our test and create awareness of metabolic issues in general. And business-wise, if we talk about that aspect, is to expand our test to all of Europe and the broader world. So for this year, definitely we want our tests available in most countries in Europe, that people have access to it, really expanding. Currently, we're operating in the Netherlands and in Switzerland, and we want to expand that to most countries in Europe. So that, as you said, I liked it, democratizing this science. that really we increase access to this test and that people can buy this at many, many locations. That's kind of our goal now for the coming years.
This is also interesting because again, listening to the to another podcast that you gave, you were going live. Now, not only you're live, but you're expanding. So that's great. Great to see. All right, we expanded a lot. Before wrapping up, anything that you'd love to share? Yeah, anything that you want to share that we didn't mention?
I think, just some advice that I can give anyone listening on their diet and metabolism is try and don't give up, because diet and metabolism is so changeable and dynamic, and it's unique to you that, I would just try things, try fasting, try a little bit of keto, try a little bit less carbs, a little bit more carbs, a little bit more fats, don't go crazy and just only eat olive oil and bread for a month, like just small changes, but like be very honest about how you feel about a change in diet. Try reducing carbs, try eating very, very little carbs for a couple of weeks, see how you feel. Can you focus better? Can you sleep better? And just keep trying and experimenting, and soon you will find, oh, actually I prefer this type of food better than that type of food because it gives me more energy, because I sleep better, because I focus better. Or so I've tried many different things, but I definitely realized, lots of fibers for lunch for me is better because it slows down the glucose release and it doesn't make me as tired during my afternoon dip. Something very practical like that can already help you get through your day quicker, and try to avoid, obviously, cakes and things during the afternoon. If it works for you, it works for you. I don't know who you are listening and what your metabolism is, but try things and be honest about how you feel. And you are the best expert of your own metabolism, so you can kind of create then your own optimal diet, and just be critical and honest to yourself about this.
Right. Don't go crazy, as you said, and eat only olive oil and bread for a month. For sure, try the olive oil from Umbria. I just had olive oil from a friend that, they also had their own olives, but I'm still running on their oil. And
I need this. I need some of this.
Yeah.
We need to try this, experiment with this.
Maybe not only that, but definitely try the experiment of like bread, a bit of salt, and olive oil. But it needs to be a good olive oil.
Can't go wrong.
Yeah. And we already have one experiment to run, which is going to be the bread chewed for a long time, and I'm curious to get to the sweetness. Like it's fun. I love experimenting as well. So that's going to be the first experiment I run. Well, Chris, thanks so much. It's been awesome. I'm sure that listener get so many takeaways and learns a ton. So thanks so much. To the next.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here, and I hope I could help people a little bit with some information and science.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for learning with me in today's discussion with Chris. If you got inspired and want to do a favor to a friend, please share the link to the episode. This is also a great way to support the podcast. For any suggestions or to simply show your appreciation, please leave a note in the comment section. Until next time.